It appears there might be a bipartisan deal on infrastructure, but it's also not good. So now let me break down what the deal is and what some of the red flags are in this new bipartisan compromise infrastructure bill. So now the Wall Street Journal is reporting that a core bipartisan group of 10 senators has recently reached a deal with the White House on Thursday to spend about $973 billion over 5 years and $1.2 trillion if continued over 8 years. So of course that is a big if, $1.2 trillion that probably will not get spent if Republicans get back into power. Now, this package, however, would apparently only fund improvements to roads, bridges, transit, airports, and enhanced infrastructure for broadband, water, and electric vehicles. Now, generally, that spending doesn't sound too bad. All right. And I'm totally fine with that. But as you can see, the framework, and that's what this is really focused only on physical infrastructure. And so let me give you more details about what's in it. The plan includes nearly $400 billion in expected baseline transportation funding that Congress must regularly renew. So there's no guarantee on that, along with $579 billion in new spending. Of the new spending, 312 will go to transportation projects, and 266 billion would go to other infrastructure like water systems, broadband, and improving power grids, which needs it. You definitely need it. The transportation section has $109 billion of funding for roads and bridges, 49 for mass transit, that's 49 billion, 66 billion for passenger and freight rail, 25 billion for airports, 16 billion for seaports and waterways, and 15 billion for EV infrastructure and electric buses. Also includes provisions for infrastructure financing and safety. And of course, you have 55 billion going to water infrastructure, 65 billion for broadband, 73 billion for building thousands of miles of new transmission lines intended to speed the transition to renewable energy. There's also $21 billion for environmental remediation of polluted areas to Superfund sites. And of course, $47 billion for resilience projects to deal with climate change, extreme weather events, and cyber attacks. Of course, the money for climate change doesn't seem like it would be all that much enough. And so, but there it is. There's nothing about elder care, child care, education, just strictly roads, bridges, and the like. Okay. Now, how are you going to pay for it? Well, not by raising taxes. Republicans rejected the White House plan to raise taxes on corporations to cover the cost. And the White House has opposed the lawmakers' ideas to index the gas tax to inflation and charge fees to electric vehicles to finance the spending. So basically, Republicans understand they wanted you to pay more in gas taxes. That was their plan. Great. Champions of the middle class, folks. As opposed to, by the way, which is incredibly popular, the idea of taxing corporations. They would rather say, no, we're going to shift the cost to the middle class, to regular people, working class, who drive to work every day, who commute. We're going to increase that gas tax, make you pay for it. Because we're not going to have anything to touch our donors. We're not going to let anything touch those donors. We are the shield. We will protect you. And that's what it is. That's what it's about. Now, here's where another red flag comes into play. Lawmakers expect to raise about $100 billion through public-private partnerships, direct pay municipal bonds, according to a person familiar with the discussions. They also plan to generate a net of about $100 billion by investing $40 billion to tighten enforcement at the IRS. That's fine. They also want to repurpose $80 billion from prior pandemic relief bills. But again, no raising corporate taxes. But again, there's more. But first, let's talk about corporate taxes. You know that 55 of the nation's largest corporations paid nothing in federal taxes. More than $40 billion in profits last year during a pandemic. It's insane that this is not even in the bill. It's insane that Republicans are like, no, we're not going to raise corporate taxes. Not once. Not a tiny little fraction. Nothing. You will get nothing from our corporate donors. Absolutely nothing. Even though they made billions upon billions of dollars in profit. We don't care. We're going to soak regular people. That's the sickness in America. That's the compromise? Come on. Not only that, but it gets worse. Always gets worse. These corporations, a combined federal rebate of more than $3 billion for an effective tax rate of negative 9%. It gets worse. Common Dream staff writer Jessica Corbett points out in a recent article saying that the proposal that has progressives alarmed, and a lot of this stuff alarms me, is relying on public-private partnerships, private activity bonds, direct pay bonds, and something called asset recycling. Asset recycling. Asset recycling, by the way, involves the sale or lease of public assets to the private sector. This is privatization. 100%. So the government can then put the money that they sell from public assets to putting it towards new investment. That policy was previously encouraged by former President Donald Trump, despite lessons from Australia about its pitfalls. Let me tell you a little bit about that. Apparently, in Australia, they tried this, and it failed, because the core problem with it is that income-generating assets were sold to finance new investments that did not generate any income, rather like selling your house to buy an expensive car. This is a trick that can only be done once and leaves governments with increased amounts of debt. Rihanna Eckel, an organizer with Food and Water Watch, also cautioned that this entire thing could, quote, facilitate a Wall Street takeover of public services like water. Mary Grant, the advocacy's group Public Water for All director, echoed that warning as well Thursday, saying this White House-approved infrastructure deal is a disaster in the making. It promotes privatization and so-called public-private partnerships instead of making public investments in publicly owned infrastructure. You know, like we would if we actually just did that. There's literally nothing stopping us from putting money into infrastructure. If we can print out trillions of dollars in liquidity to give to the banks, why the hell can't we use that to fund infrastructure, public infrastructure, instead of selling off public assets to be recycled to private corporations to use the money? It's ridiculous. Grant also noted that communities across the country have been ripped off by public-private schemes that enrich corporations and Wall Street investors and leave the rest of us to pick up the tab. One example Common Dreams recently reported on was the privatization of Chicago's public parking meters. Illinois drivers recently filed a class action lawsuit alleging that Chicago had granted a private company, quote, monopoly control over the city's parking meter system for the next 75 years. So let me get that straight. Chicago said, let's sell off our parking meter system to a private corporation for 75 years. Is anyone going to be driving cars in 75 years? Well, I guess they're going to try to make sure of it so they can get the money back from their investment. Jesus. So, great. All of these red flags, massive privatization, and no investments in human beings. And of course, at least we get to fix some infrastructure, though. I mean, yeah, well, there you go. Something, right? But it gets worse. One more. American Prospect staff writer Alex Salmon also pointed out that this bipartisan infrastructure bill, the infrastructure that they invest in mostly is in fossil fuels. Expanding airports, freeways, ports, and again, privatization. It goes backwards on climate. Doesn't do anything about climate. So really, I mean, I read you the numbers on how much it actually invests in doing anything about climate change, and it does next to nothing. So this is garbage. Not all of the plan is bad. Obviously, we do need to do stuff about infrastructure, but it really does not go far enough. And the privatization is very, very concerning. If this is all we're going to get, well, then it sucks. And it's a bad deal. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.